Welcome to a discussion of teaching transitional justice with somebody who does do exactly that. And that would be Nicole Christine Rangel, who joins us from California. And she's a lawyer, but she's also completely motivated. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thank you, Jay. It's great to be on the show. It's great to join this audience of like-minded world changers.
So let me just congratulate you on being a legal and program manager for Project Expedite Justice, one of my favorite organizations in the world, and trying to do, what has to be done. What motivates you? At what point in your life, Nicole, if you decided you want to do something really important and then start doing it?
Yes, what motivates me is seeing people who need assistance and knowing that the assistance can be provided. So I have had multiple clients in the past with problems akin to problems anybody has, problems that the legal system was designed to address, and they're unable to address them because of lack of resources, because of lack of access. And that is a problem I see unfold across the globe. And when I started seeing that that was happening as a result of our America's foreign policy when I was in college, that's really when things changed for me. So I went to UCSB during the Second Iraq War, and I was a member of SAW, which is Students Against War, which is a longtime running organization that unfortunately has had to protest several US activities in Iraq. And in getting involved in those anti-war efforts, I began to see, even more so than I ever did before, how everyday problems and everyday access to justice issues that I'd experienced or seen in my community were happening all over the world. And they were happening at an even worse degree and systematically in places where there are atrocities, conflict, corruption, etc. And that's when the idea really came to me that I want to get involved to change the state of the world. And in doing so, I had a couple of great mentors. And one of them is still a mentor of mine today. His name is Professor Richard Falk. And he is one of the most eminent minds in human rights academia that I can think of. And the way that he challenged me to look at issues that I thought I already knew something about, the way that he challenged me to get involved and supporting activists doing more than just legal challenges, along with the work of other professors I had and an internship I had at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, really opened my eyes to the connections of foreign policy, world politics, and the state of atrocities that I want to fix and the problems that I would like to see solved for the betterment of the majority of the world community. And once you see that, it's just something you can't unsee. And I decided that I was going to focus all of my efforts on trying to be a part of that positive change and trying to do so with the best skill set I thought I had, which was going to law school. So I went to law school to become a human rights lawyer, and now I sit before you today.
Yeah, well, I know a guy who signs his email. It only takes a committed person or small group of people to change the world. And I've been waiting for a good part of my life for that change to happen. It hasn't happened yet. In fact, and not to get upset about it, but it seems to be getting worse. We're talking about the state of humanity, and we're talking about the state of this country, and we're talking about the state of the world, and it just seems all to be devolving into chaos. And your write-up about what you would like to talk about is really consistent with my view of all of that. So, how do you change the world as an individual who is committed or with a group? who is committed, how do you change a world that is devolving?
It is a never-ending task, and no one can do it alone. I'll start with that. However, knowing that can't stop someone from starting to be the change that they want to see. I think that it takes a little bit of effort from everyone to get there. And once we have the awareness shared as a human community of the state of problems and the way in which we can address them. I
You
mean,
know,
for
I've talked to a lot of Project Expedite Justice people, and I like talking to them in Europe and Latin America and what have you. And I always, I'm always impressed by their altruism, by their caring. But I always ask them this question, and I'll ask you that question too. So you have some very strong feelings about this, and you are doing what you can do, at least for the moment. Maybe later there'll be more, much more.
Mhm.
But how many people in your age group, how many people in your community and your among your colleagues and the people you know and deal with feel the same way? And when I talk to them in Europe or Latin America, they said, "Tell you the truth, I don't know too many people who feel this way. I'm kind of unique." And that question I put to you, Nicole, I'd like to know whether you are surrounded with people who feel the same way or maybe not.
For me, it's a mixed bag. I will say that I try to surround myself with like-minded progressive thinkers. So to the extent that I can choose the circles I'm in, I would say that my voice is echoed. However, I have recently moved back to the United States for the first time in almost a decade.
Where have you been?
I've lived in Holland, I've lived in Lebanon, Jordan, Tanzania, multiple places. And adjusting to returning home is always difficult, but adjusting to returning home to realize that you may be a minority in the way that you look at the state of the world and the fact that if we don't do something about it, there may not be a state of a world to address in as little as 10 years. It is very unsettling. However, I will say it has inspired me to do more on the ground here.
You know,
You,
one of the things that struck me in looking at your write-up of what you wanted to discuss is that, you have to teach people, you have to bring them a certain level of awareness that maybe they didn't have. I mean, most people here, and I suppose in most major cities, if you asked them who the Secretary of State was, they would give you a blank stare, which is extraordinary because, our future depends in large part on who the Secretary of State is.
Mhm.
And so, teaching and raising awareness, encouraging critical thinking, engaging in a world of media, social media especially, it's hard to engage with people who are fixed on their phones and live in, a bubble of media that doesn't really help them. So, query, how do you teach this level of awareness? Where and how and in what way?
So I personally teach this level of awareness at Chapman University here in Orange County, and I teach in the Peace Studies department. So I'm very fortunate to have a group of dedicated students that are inspired and interested in the issues I teach. Not always. Sometimes we have people taking the classes for requirements or other things, but that's specifically how I raise awareness as a professor. However, I think what's more effective and possibly what you're asking is how do we raise awareness generally, and how do we do it in a way that's not divisive, especially here in the United States? And while you raise a great point that we as Americans are not so up to speed on the trivia of our own political system and other things that we would hope we had a collective knowledge of as Americans. One thing we do have is a lot of social media and a lot of discussions. And while we may not be able to quiz somebody on the cabinet members or something like that. We can discuss the issues that are facing our cabinet members and eventually facing our congresspeople, and the issues that we as American voters have the power to create a collective response on. So the underlying issues here are things that we can build awareness on outside of the political system. And for example, climate change is one of these areas. If we look at climate change out of the political system and we look at it scientifically and we look at what it is we can do from a technological standpoint to prevent the rise in temperatures and deal with the problem we have from not doing enough at a critical juncture right now, we will inevitably start the mechanics of the changes that need to happen that will then otherwise be reflected in our government in these conversations.
You know, 60 Minutes talked about the Colorado River and how it will affect agriculture all over the West, including Hawaii. And then we hear about the Panama Canal running out of water. And if it runs out of water, they have to find a way to get fresh water in there to raise the boats and the various links in the canal. And that's expensive. And so shipping becomes more expensive. Gasoline is more expensive. Not to say that gasoline is the solution to anything, but gasoline is more expensive. Transportation is more expensive. Everything you turn around is more expensive. And so you say, well, you know, the stock market's doing okay. People tell me they made a lot of money this year. But sorry, that's not a solution at all. That's looking at your shoelaces. We have to look forward, and we have to deal with water, for example. We have to deal with, you called it ecocide. If we have ecocide happening all around, that creates migration, but involuntary migration. It creates disruption in civil society. We know that is a clear, obvious connection there. And then you have Africa burning. So, you know, I'm very troubled by that. And I agree with you. So there's two of us, okay? There's two of us. But what can we do? Teaching a course in law school or in college isn't going to do it. Running for office might do it. Being on a media perch in some way, as a credible voice in a conversation which, you know, is heard far and wide, that might do it. But we don't have the time to waste. We have to do it now. This generation, we have to raise awareness for virtually hundreds of millions of people if we are going to escape ecocide, I'll call it ecocide, and the loss of democracy in so many places in the world. It's out of a biblical disaster, all of this. And I'm glad you recognize that. And I'm looking for an answer. So, Nicole, what do we, people like you and arguably me, what do we do to change these really threatening directions?
We cannot stop awareness raising. However, in addition to that, we also need to hand over the reins to the generation below us and the generations that will now shape how our world changes. It doesn't mean we stop being a part of it. It doesn't mean we stop raising awareness, but it does mean that we acknowledge that the tools, for example, that I gained in law school and that I've used in my career to litigate cases, for example, at international criminal tribunals, those are great skills. And hopefully those skills will continue to allow me to help provide justice in a lot of places that are not getting justice.
You could have great skills, be a great litigator, prosecutor, what have you, a great investigator. And indeed, Project Expedite Justice has that. And you can see from where you are the influence, the power, the usefulness of those skills. However, we've been dealing with Ukraine for a year and a half already. And I'm sorry to say, there's not a whole lot of prosecution going on. And I don't see anybody hanging from the gallows or even for a long-term sentence for what they have done. I read this morning that the Russians have reported that, gee, what is it? I could be wrong about the number, but 700,000 children have been kidnapped from Ukraine.
Mhm,
That is absolutely staggering.
mhm.
That is genocide by the definition of genocide under the Rome Treaty. And has there been one single person prosecuted for that? Those kids are getting older and they're further and further away from their culture and their upbringing and their parents and a reasonable life. I want there to be prosecutions to at least deter others, other Russian organizations, what have you, other Russian generals, what have you, from doing that. And yet it's not happening. The institutions that you're talking about, see if you agree with me, are not moving quickly enough. They have to be reformed. They have to be expedited. Let me think. Project Expedite Justice. That's kind of like your middle name, isn't it? We have to change the world that deals with these issues also, right?
We do, but for me, um, it's not so much about changing and replacing. It's about buttressing with other things. So going back to the skills that I learned and how those skills hopefully will help me be able to engage in justice processes in other places. In addition to that, I need to be looking at these issues from other perspectives and other disciplines. I need to be looking at how my legal arguments connect with what the health sector is facing. For example, in Ukraine, I need to look at how my legal arguments might affect whether or not the people there can access the food and water that they need. Prosecutions can be lengthy, they can be time consuming. Even the prosecutions after World War II took years and years and years. And I think it's very important to, number one, look at the quality of these things, because we definitely don't want sham institutions having people hang from the gallows. That is a human rights violation also. We need to be looking beyond the institutions we already know. So with respect to the abducted children, for example, we do have 2 ICC arrest warrants. And that is something that, honestly, when I started teaching last semester, while the Ukraine war had just started, but wasn't as far advanced as it is now, I didn't think there was ever going to be a point in my course where I was going to be teaching about something optimistically developing as far as the world of international justice and this conflict. And I was pleasantly proved wrong with these arrest warrants. And it was something that I could discuss with the students as a positive development on the world political stage. However, we do need to look at what exactly that means. And that means that we do have some ears, and we do have the world listening. However, it's not enough just to rest on the laurels of what it is we know and what it is we're pursuing as far as these global justice entities. We also need to be looking at transitional justice within Ukraine. We also need to be looking at interdisciplinary approaches to securing basic necessities like food, water, and electricity. There are other interdisciplinary approaches that may address the needs of the people suffering in these circumstances well before and more complementary to their needs than the justice system will eventually bring.
Let's talk about blue helmets for a minute.
Okay.
In Rwanda, they left town,
Mm-hmm.
and Rwanda, well, we all know the horrendous things that happened after that. And so I think that humanity needs a policeman at the elbow, legal term, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it needs a strong leadership. And the United Nations really hasn't provided that. But theoretically, I'm asking, theoretically, wouldn't it be better if there were blue helmets across sub-Saharan Africa across a number of the countries in Latin America, across various countries in Asia, where they say, you can't do that. You can't do that. We're not going to let you do that. Stop doing that. We don't have that. We don't have that really anywhere. And what I would like to see is blue helmets. But I think the United Nations is, over time has become flawed because of the Security Council veto issue. And the United Nations doesn't do it. And if the United Nations doesn't do it, nobody does it. And so there are no blue helmets anywhere in the world. And the United States is not the world's policeman. Not to say that it should not be the world's policeman. I, for one, feel that it should be the world's policeman, at least in the blue helmet sense. You can't do that. You can't murder people. You can't do that. We're not going to let you do that. So where are we going with this? Because it seems to be getting worse.
Well, I would definitely agree with you that the United Nations is not playing that role that we envisioned that it might play when we set it up. However, I do think the focus on the presence of blue helmets is misplaced. Using Rwanda as an example, the blue helmets were there. It wasn't for their lack of presence, it was for the lack of mandate given to the blue helmets to be able to do anything. And that
Isn't that just leadership or political will, global political will?
it is global political will. But without that, we can't be in these places. We need that in order to have a UN mandate. So the world has decided that multiple places are places where we need to have these eyes and ears on the ground. In fact, there are multiple blue helmets across Africa right now. There are many missions, from CAR to DRC to UMNIS. There are many UN missions on the continent currently.
It's great to have humanitarian mission in a place like Sudan, but those two, vying armies are killing each other in the middle. I might add, there's a lot of failed states, and it's not only failed states in sub-Saharan Africa. We heard yesterday about Haiti. Haiti is a failed state run by gangs. Who is going to step in is not going to be the United Nations, and I would guess it's not going to be the United States. What happens to a place like Haiti, which is a failed state?
It has actually been requested that there be a UN mission to Haiti. That has been what has been requested as a response to that situation. Regarding what else we can do, however, even as Americans, there's a lot we can do, including revisit the protected status that Haitians have currently had in this country and their ability to be able to come to the United States as refugees. That is something that the administration since Obama have not been doing as well as we could be doing. And we also need to look at our resource allocation in these ways. It's an appropriate question to ask whether or not we are providing less temporary protected status to Haitians in the United States because we're providing so many protected statuses to Ukrainians. It's a valid question.
Let's look at the whole migration problem across the southern border. Part of it is we care about people, about human beings, human rights, whatnot. And we shouldn't have what did Governor Abbott do? He put barbed wire in the middle of the Rio Grande. That's a great idea. And God knows what else him and DeSantis have done to dump on human beings. But I don't think it's just a matter of tuning up the border, tuning up our immigration laws. It goes back to the policies the United States has had with regard to Latin America from way back when. We claim to be their protector. We claim that nobody else should come in and mess with the Latin America, but then we don't really help them. And so you have not only Haiti, but a number of failed states where you can't have a good life. It's impossible for so many reasons. And it's a civil society is less and less possible even in a number of countries there. So, it opens the question about whether we should deal with migrants or whether we should deal with countries, at distance, the countries that are failing. Um, we haven't done that. And that, to me, that would be more important than putting barbed wire and not putting barbed wire. How about helping those countries have a decent life? And that's not in our policy, and it's not in the Republican Party's policy either. And as long as they have any clout in Congress, or God forbid, may I say that, in the White House, they're not going to help people. They're not humanitarian. They don't care about climate change. They don't care about humanitarian issues. And the government of the United States was once a beacon on the hill, now questionable. And so, how much of what you do and what you think about and your level of teaching awareness and all that is dedicated to changing the way the United States conducts business on a global scale? Because everything is global.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my biggest goal in teaching, honestly, is to get students to look at the effects that we are having in our policy, in our economy, in our communications, in our technology in the United States, and how that's affecting the rest of the world. I mean, a big part of teaching is putting together dots that don't necessarily seem like they connect. It's often like one of those children's exercises where you're following the dots, making an illustration that you didn't even know was there. To circle back to what you've raised about the United States history in Latin and South America, definitely the first starting point for me in this dialogue with the students is to teach them about United States neoliberalism and the effect we had on these states and our complicity, if not our driving forces towards making these failed states. Many of the failed states in the global South are a result of interventionist policies of the global North. And that's not something that should be overlooked. That's something that we need to be accountable for and respond to. And I think that is exactly what you should be thinking about when you're talking about these border issues or other complex issues. It's not just that we need to respond in a humane way and abide by our own policies, which we are not doing on the southern border. We are flagrantly violating international law and the Universal Declaration for refugees on the southern border. We are flagrantly violating our own obligations under international law on the southern border. But not just raising attention to that, but raising attention to the fact that we are doing that to the very people who are fleeing violence that we had a hand in creating. We had a hand in creating the situation in these failed states. Haiti is a perfect example of our intervention repeatedly up until most recently with the death of the president. And it would be naive, irresponsible, if not putting on full blinders to teach in any other way than to expect that we as advocates and human rights defenders need to address those underlying causes and need to respond to them. And we need to bring parties to the table that are not just parties who are suffering whatever the current situation is, but parties who are responsible for that. I mean, if you look at Israel, Palestine, there is absolutely no way to look at what is happening, the gross and severe human rights violations Israel's inflicting against Palestinians and not think we had some hand in that as Americans who support Israeli policy. And those are questions we need to ask and we need to face ourselves if we are really going to have the change and effect on the world that we want to have and not become a world power that crumbles in light of these challenges.
like going to a dance, and having the dance card include everybody in the room. That's a pretty big, ambitious program you're talking about. And what I would like to see, maybe to some extent, I do see it. I see a generation coming up, a generation you're better, in touch with than me or people I know, but a generation which could speak to this, a generation which could change the political compass here in the United States, a generation that could take the leadership again. But one thing is clear, you know, when we see the fires and the floods and the extreme weather, what have you, when we see the outbreaks of pandemics, we know that the planet is, deteriorating, and people don't necessarily connect that with climate change. They don't connect it with ecocide. It's like the guy who refuses to wear a mask or take a vaccine, and he's in the hospital dying. He's dying, and he says to the doctor, "Okay, okay, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't wear a mask or take a vaccine. Could you give me those things now?" And the doctor says, "Sorry, buddy, it's much too late for you now." And in a way, I think that one, scenario is being repeated in multiple ways for millions of people. They don't take it seriously. I mean, it's like, will the press ever really tell us that these floods and droughts and extreme weather are the result of climate change and climate change is our own fault? Will they ever tell us that? Will they ever say, "Look, would you guys get on the bandwagon and fix it"? No, they just tell you there's all bad flood. Yeah. Um, it's the same. It's the same thing with so many things in the world that are on our dance card. And
Mhm.
I just wonder how you obviously sacrificed 10 years away from home.
Mhm.
You went hither and yon. You could have been hurt. You could have been killed. You could have been kidnapped or worse. And so, I'm thinking we have to make sacrifices. We can't have the soft life and expect to fix this sort of thing. We all have to make sacrifices now or involuntarily later. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I think the reality we're headed to is involuntarily making those sacrifices because we're not putting the policy in place to address these problems. And using floods and fires is a very real example. In the United States and in California, for example, we have state and FEMA, state and federal allocated resources to respond to certain natural disasters. We have been stretching those resources thin well before Katrina happened, and we continue to stretch them. There will come a time in the very near future, just as it happened with the pandemic, where even if we call for those resources, we do not have them to offer. And unlike the fires that happened last year in California, where many people were able to at least try to access some form of compensation and some form of assistance, not only are we looking at a world where that assistance, if offered, is going to be much less, we're looking at a world where that assistance does not exist. And unfortunately, that's the state that many places are in. I mean, if you look at the flooding that has happened in Pakistan over the last year, it is absolutely dire and absolutely life-ending conditions in many
To
places.
say nothing of the terrorism only yesterday. And that's a country with nuclear weapons. So, wow, that's the kind of deterioration should chill us all.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is probably one of the biggest takeaways is in this challenge of everything being so dire, but still needing to remain optimistic towards a solution, which is that we all have to realize that we are already at that threshold. If we are not starting our own solutions personally and in our communities today, we will face the repercussions of all of these problems. We are already facing problems that are effects of the Ukraine war, and we are not the United States, we are not direct recipients of some of the exports that are being even more stifled in the last couple of days. However, there are people who relied on those channels of export who are starving today because of those decisions. There are many, many countries, unfortunately, in the Middle East and Africa, but around the world, that have full-scale malnutrition and starvation rates that are going to mean that an entire generation is lost if we are not able to correct that. That exists in Sudan, that exists in Yemen, that could, and those are things where we are currently on the precipice of losing entire generations because we are failing to act right now.
When you say losing, I think you mean what I mean, that they will die by the hundreds of millions.
They are dying by the hundreds of millions, and even those that are surviving in conditions and worlds that are unidentifiable from the place that they were born into. So to use Yemen as an example, in addition to all sides of the conflict, I believe, using starvation knowingly as a weapon of war, we have also riddled the breadbasket area of that country with landmines. We have ignored crops that are no longer growing, and the internal sufficiency of the country that used to exist. And we are leaving the current generation and future generations to die in these situations. There is not land to farm. And even if there were land to farm, there are not the resources to do it well. And then if it's done well, it's not enough food, or it is enough food, but people cannot afford it. These are all problems that are happening right now. And they're problems that we've lost a lot of people in Yemen, but we will continue to lose entire generations. We will lose Yemeni culture as a result of this. We will lose a lot with what has already happened. The risk of what we lose if we don't continue to act against these things is something that I shudder to think about, and is the reason that I keep going to work every day.
We started talking about teaching and teaching college classes or law school classes, but I have been very impressed with organizations and schools and teachers that have taught very young kids. Now, there are parents who don't want their kids exposed to unpleasantness or, pessimism. But the fact is, these kids will be exposed to everything you're talking about. And we have to teach them to be part of a generation that will come up and do stuff that will ameliorate the problems. And I'm not sure we're doing that. I mean, look at Florida, look at DeSantis. He doesn't want to teach them about the realities of slavery. It's just extraordinary how it doublethink. It's out of a book. And I mean, not a good book, by the way.
A banned book.
I'm not sure exactly. But, what do you think about that? We not only have to teach the ones who are coming out into, what do you want to call it, the policy workforce, which is what you're doing. But we have to teach every child, everybody, what the real stakes are here. And if they think that water is going to remain free at the tap, think again. Not going to happen. And there'll be wars over water. There already are.
Yep.
And so, we have got to make everyone familiar with this. And I mean, you got to do it before, not after the fact, because after the fact means that a lot of people have died in the process. I'm really working myself up here, Nicole. I'm sorry. The bottom line is what you're doing is very hard. And you need an army of people, not to use that term. You need a large group of people to try to spread the word to as many places as you possibly can. You've seen it, you've been there, you know about it, and everybody has. And Project Expedite, that's why I so admire Project Expedite Justice, because they understand these things. But time is of the essence. And as we look around, from week to week, we see these things getting worse. I don't know what to do about it. I'm old, For me, it's not on, it's not going to happen on my watch. But think of all those kids.
I mean, you're not leaving me with much of a window to respond optimistically. But I mean, I feel similarly. I mean, you feel it's not going to happen on your watch. I feel if it doesn't happen on mine, there won't be a watch for the future generations. I truly question whether or not I will live the full extent of my life as is planned, or there will be a worldwide upset to how long I am on this planet. And I believe that future generations are in a unique position to feel that in a way that they realize what's at stake. And I also feel that they are better sorted to look at interdisciplinary approaches to these problems, to look across the sectors and not just think of a legal solution, not just think of a policy solution, but to really look at how we can integrate technology, how we can address these problems from several innovative perspectives. And I think they feel the urgency. And that is why I struggle so much in my classes to provide successful examples, as small as they may be, or as infrequent as they may be, especially in light of the frequency of atrocities on the other side. But I really think it's important when they can grasp on to the idea that change is possible and that they have the tools to do it. I mean, I think that climate change being led by Greta is a big part of this as well. I think this is the first time that we've ever seen activist youth generations be taken seriously. And I think that's going to continue. I mean, the students in Europe who are suing under the European Court of Human Rights, suing their own countries for climate change. I hope that United States children are taking note and next to get in line. I mean, I also hope that our Supreme Court changes before then, but these are lessons that American youth hopefully are seeing unfold around the world and wondering how we can get involved and how we can help. And the other thing is they're just so well connected. And that's something that, as much as I have become the millennial generation, I am not best placed to tell you which app works well here and allows me to communicate with people in Sudan, but my students are. And those are the lessons that we should be learning and the cues we should be taking to be able to give them our knowledge and expertise where we can. For me, if that's in these legal proceedings, and where I can't, to learn from them and see where I can possibly step aside and let them pave a way that hopefully will bring us closer to addressing the world's problems and not have us repeat the same mistakes.
Well, this conversation makes me think of a particular scenario because I feel that the right solutions don't necessarily bubble up on and emerge out of a porridge of social media. It doesn't go that way with humanity. We're still mammals, and we have to have some sort of organizational arrangement, institutional leadership somehow. And so here's the scenario that I think of. There you are in your class. And at least some of what we're talking about is getting through to those kids, your students who, have lives. They enjoy they enjoy their lives. After all, it's Orange County, it's a happy time.
Mhm.
But, the problems are coming to them. So some kid in the last seat, the last row, says, Professor Rangel, I need to know what I can do. I am going to accept everything, even the things that you really haven't told me. I'm going to connect all the dots, and I'm not going to be depressed about it. I am going to take affirmative action. So, Professor Rangel, tell me what I should do starting tomorrow morning.
The list is too long. I mean, I honestly, the first thing I would say is come to my office hours because the list is too long for us to go over it now. But if you're willing, there are 10 things you can accomplish right now. Writing your representatives, that being number one. Having conversations with your immediate family members, roommates, anyone in your immediate surroundings.
How about a Trumper?
In particular, people that do not share your point of view. I am a descendant of a mixed ticket family, and that is a mixed ticket family that goes all the way up to my grandparents' generation and my great-grandparents' generation. These are conversations that I do not stray away from, despite the difficulties of how that may complicate my dad watching a football game. I do not stray away from these conversations, knowing that we won't have a solution to them because when we enter them, so preventing me from even going into them. So that's two things. In addition to that, there's a lot that you can do within your community. So specifically in Orange County and specifically on our campus, I mean, yes, a student life is a privileged life, but also many of my students are food insecure. Many of my students rely on the public pantries of Orange County and also of the university. If you're one of those persons, in addition to depending on them, please volunteer. If you're not one of those persons, please figure out how it is you can either donate or volunteer to help those other students. You can go to human rights related events in your community so that you can find out what are the issues that are affecting your community directly. They will inevitably be very different than the issues facing your country, even your state. What happens locally is really important and the first step to acting globally. Next on the list would be activism. Social media, in the streets, pick a cause, get involved. The number of female students I have that are enraged about what the Supreme Court has done in the Dobbs decision, but have not stepped foot in the streets to protest that decision are too many for me to count. And that's something that we need to be doing. Civil obedience works. It has worked in the past, and we need to continue to utilize the tools we know work. I mean, that's only 5 things, but there is no shortage of things we can do almost immediately to get involved. It's staying involved and not being discouraged by the fact that when you take 1 step, there's no immediate change. When you take 2 steps, there's no immediate change. When you take 3 steps, there's no immediate change. And now someone in your family member is upset with you because of your views. You take 4 steps, no immediate change. But all of a sudden you start to realize there's 1 more person who's coming to the food pantry every week and is either getting their needs met or helping other people meet their needs. And this is how change happens on a practical basis.
Don't stop, you know? What I mean, Nicole, is that you have to generate a lot of clone Nicoles everywhere you go, everybody you touch, and have them all think this way, and all of them should be filling their dance cards with issues and solutions. Thank you for joining us today. I realize we went from east to west and north to south, but that's okay because that's what you do every day. Thank you so much. Nicole Christine Rangel, Project Expedite Justice. Aloha.